The 12 people seated around that conference table had no idea what was about to happen. Neither did my COO, who was standing at the head of the room with his arms crossed, staring at me like I was the problem. 22 years. I had given that company 22 years of my life, and in that moment, he was asking me to throw all of it away, along with the lives of every driver who would one day cross the Millbrook Creek Bridge. I looked at him. I looked at the stack of falsified drawings sitting in the center of the table. Then I reached into my jacket pocket. But I need to back up, because this story doesn't start in that conference room. It starts on a Tuesday morning in March, when my COO called me into his office to tell me his son-in-law Derek was being brought on as senior project coordinator for the Millbrook Creek contract. I had been with Hargrove Infrastructure Solutions since I was 32 years old. I came up through the ranks the hard way, started as a field engineer doing site inspections in the rain, worked my way through project management, earned my professional engineer license on my third attempt after 2 kids and a mortgage, and eventually became chief structural engineer for the entire Mid-Atlantic Division. The work we did mattered: state highway contracts, municipal bridges, flood control infrastructure, real things that real people depended on every day without thinking twice about it. My COO, a man I'll call Gerald, had been with the company almost as long as I had. We respected each other, mostly. He was good with clients, good with budgets, not always great with people, but that was fine. We made it work. Then his daughter married Derek. Derek was 29 years old. He had a business degree from a school I had never heard of, 18 months of experience at a commercial real estate firm, and zero, I mean absolutely zero background in civil engineering or infrastructure. What he did have was a father-in-law who ran one of the largest regional infrastructure firms in the state of Virginia. When Gerald told me Derek would be joining the Millbrook Creek team, I said the only thing I could say professionally. I said I looked forward to working with him and asked what his specific role would be. Gerald said Derek would handle cost coordination and vendor relationships for the project. I said that sounded reasonable. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. The Millbrook Creek Bridge replacement was a $47 million contract with the Virginia Department of Transportation. We had been awarded it after 18 months of competitive bidding. The original bridge had been built in 1967 and was functionally obsolete, too narrow, load rating below current standards, drainage system completely failed. The new design called for a 4-lane precast concrete structure with a design life of 75 years. Every material, every load calculation, every connection detail had been reviewed and approved by VDOT engineers before we ever broke ground. I want you to understand what that means. When VDOT approves a bridge design, they are not approving a suggestion. They are approving a binding specification that the contractor is legally and professionally obligated to follow. Deviation from approved specs on a state transportation project is not a gray area. It is not a creative interpretation. It is fraud. And in some cases, it is criminal negligence, because the people who drive across that bridge are trusting their lives to the numbers in those documents. Derek started in April. For the first 2 months, things seemed fine. He sat in on procurement meetings, handled some of the vendor calls, sent a lot of emails. He was energetic in the way that people are energetic when they don't yet understand the weight of what they're doing. The first sign something was wrong came in June, when our steel fabricator sent a revised quote for the bearing assemblies. I almost missed it because it came through Derek's procurement channel rather than my engineering review queue. The quote was for a different bearing type than what our approved drawings specified. Not dramatically different, same general category, different load rating. But the load rating mattered. It mattered a lot. I called the fabricator directly. The man on the other end of the line was confused. He said the revised spec had come from our office. From Derek. I went to Derek's desk and asked him about it. He smiled and said he had found a supplier who could do the bearings for about $60,000 less, and that the performance difference was minimal according to the supplier's own literature. I explained to him, as calmly as I could, that we don't use supplier literature to evaluate structural components. We use engineering calculations reviewed and stamped by a licensed PE. I explained that the approved drawings specified a bearing with a load rating of 400,000 pounds, and that what he had quoted was rated for 280,000. I explained that bridges don't fail on their best day, they fail on their worst day, under maximum load, in conditions nobody planned for. Derek nodded along and said he would loop in Gerald before making any final decisions. 2 weeks later, I found the purchase order. The bearings had been ordered, the cheaper ones, and attached to the PO was a memo from Gerald authorizing the substitution on the basis of equivalent performance. I sat at my desk for a long time after I found that document. Gerald was not a structural engineer. He could not evaluate bearing performance. He had authorized a substitution of a critical load-bearing component on a public bridge based on a memo written by his 29-year-old son-in-law who had a business degree and no PE license. And somewhere, a supplier was already manufacturing the wrong parts. I went back to Gerald's office and laid the PO on his desk. I told him plainly that the substitution was not compliant with VDOT-approved specifications and that we were obligated to submit a formal engineering change request if we wanted to modify any approved component. I told him that the change request would require PE-stamped calculations demonstrating equivalence, and that in my professional opinion, equivalence could not be demonstrated because the load ratings were not equivalent. Gerald looked at the document for a moment, then looked at me, and said that procurement decisions of this nature were within his authority as COO, and that I should trust that the right people had reviewed it. I asked him which licensed engineer had reviewed it. He said the matter was settled. I went back to my office and I started keeping records. I want to be clear about something. I did not start keeping records because I was planning to burn the company down. I started keeping records because I am a professional engineer licensed by the Commonwealth of Virginia, and my license carries with it a legal and ethical obligation to protect public safety. That obligation does not pause because my boss tells me the matter is settled. It does not yield to office politics or family dynamics. It is not negotiable. Over the next 6 weeks, I documented everything. I printed and dated every memo, every PO, every email that involved a materials substitution on the Millbrook Creek project, and there were more than I expected. Derek had been busy. The bearing assemblies were just the first. He had also substituted a lower-grade epoxy for the deck overlay, reduced the rebar spacing in 2 of the abutment walls, and switched from the specified high-performance concrete mix to a standard mix that saved roughly $90,000, but had a lower chloride resistance rating, which matters enormously for a bridge over a tidal creek in a coastal climate. Each substitution, individually, might have seemed minor to someone without an engineering background. Collectively, they represented a systematic downgrading of the structure's long-term performance and safety margin. The bridge would probably be fine for 15 or 20 years. After that, in the conditions of that site, the accelerated chloride penetration alone could compromise the rebar enough to require a full deck replacement. We were building a 75-year bridge that would need major rehabilitation in 20, and we were billing VDOT for the original, higher specification materials. That last part is the part that kept me awake at night. In September, VDOT scheduled a mid-project compliance review for October 14th, standard procedure on contracts of this size. Their inspector would visit the site, review materials documentation, compare delivered materials to approved specifications. I had been through a dozen of these reviews over the years. They were usually straightforward. This one was not going to be straightforward. I was in my office at 7 in the morning on October 9th, 5 days before the review, when Derek knocked on my door. He came in and sat down without being invited. He asked if I had a few minutes. I said yes. He told me that he was aware the VDOT review was coming up. He said Gerald had asked him to talk to me directly about how we were going to handle the materials documentation. I said I wasn't sure I understood the question. Derek said, and I want to be precise here, because his exact words matter, he said, that Gerald felt it would be best if the materials submittals presented to VDOT reflected the original approved specifications rather than the as-built conditions, and that any discrepancies could be addressed through a post-review reconciliation process internally. I looked at him for a long moment. He had just asked me to falsify federal contract documentation. I told him I needed to think about it, and that I would talk to Gerald directly. Derek nodded and said he hoped we could all be on the same page, and that Gerald had a lot of confidence in me and would hate to see things become complicated. I knew what complicated meant. When he left, I closed my office door. I opened the drawer of my desk and I took out the small digital recorder I had purchased 3 days earlier. After the second time, Gerald had told me the matter was settled. I had been carrying it with me to every meeting. I had not recorded anything yet. I rewound the conversation with Derek in my head. I had not recorded it. I was not going to make that mistake again. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Gerald. His assistant put it on his calendar for 2 p.m. I arrived 5 minutes early with the recorder running in my breast pocket. Gerald opened the conversation by telling me how critical the Millbrook Creek project was to the company's relationship with VDOT and its pipeline of future state contracts. He said he had full confidence in the team and in the work that had been done. He said the substitutions that had been made were reasonable cost management decisions. I asked him directly whether he was asking me to present VDOT-approved specifications to the inspector as the as-built record, when the actual materials on site did not match those specifications. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said that what he was asking me to do was protect the company and the project and to handle the review professionally. I asked the question again. I asked it slowly and clearly. Gerald leaned forward and said that I had been with the company for 22 years and that he would hate to see that relationship damaged over a documentation issue that could be handled internally. He said that the structural integrity of the bridge was not in question, and here he used Derek's phrase, equivalent performance, and that no one was asking me to do anything that would compromise safety. I told him I disagreed with his assessment of the safety implications. Gerald said that my job was engineering, not risk management, and that the final call on project decisions belonged to him. I left that meeting with 41 minutes of recorded audio. I spent the next 3 days making copies of everything. Physical copies went into a fireproof box in my home. Digital copies went to 2 separate encrypted cloud accounts. I also called a contact of mine at VDOT's Office of Structures, a woman I had worked with on a review panel 2 years earlier, and without identifying the specific project, I described the category of substitutions in question and asked her, as an engineering matter, whether those changes would require a formal ECR process. She said they absolutely would, and that any contractor who billed for specified materials while delivering substituted materials was potentially subject to the Virginia Fraud Against Taxpayers Act. I thanked her and said I was asking hypothetically. She said she hoped that was true. On October 13th, the day before the VDOT review, Gerald called a full project team meeting, 12 people in the room. Derek sat at Gerald's right hand. I sat at the far end of the table. Gerald went through the review agenda and then paused and looked at me. He said he wanted to make sure everyone understood that the materials documentation package would be presented as prepared by the procurement team, and that if the inspector had questions about specific components, those questions should be directed to Derek. He was cutting me out of my own compliance review. I said nothing. After the meeting, as people were filing out, Gerald asked me to stay behind. When the room emptied, he told me that he needed to know I was on board. He said the company had a lot riding on the relationship with VDOT, that Derek was family, and that sometimes in business you had to trust the people around you. I said I understood. He said he needed more than that. He said he needed me to stand up in that review tomorrow and confirm that the materials on site met the project specifications. And there it was. I looked at Gerald, a man I had worked alongside for more than 2 decades, who had shaken my hand when I passed my PE exam, who had come to my son's graduation party, and I thought about the Millbrook Creek Bridge and the thousands of people who would drive across it over the next 75 years, and I thought about what my license meant and what I had promised when I signed it. I told him I would be there tomorrow. He seemed satisfied with that. The VDOT compliance review began at 9 in the morning. The inspector, a man named Robert Farley, had been with VDOT's Quality Assurance Division for 16 years. I had met him once before on a different project. He was thorough, and he was not easily impressed by presentations. Gerald opened with 15 minutes of project overview. Derek presented the materials documentation package, a binder nearly 2 inches thick, professionally formatted, with tabs and summary sheets and photos of the site. It was a beautiful document. It was also, in multiple critical respects, inaccurate. Farley worked through the binder methodically. He asked about the concrete mix design. Derek cited a spec number. Farley cross-referenced it with his own copy of the approved submittals and asked for the delivery tickets. Derek produced delivery tickets. Farley looked at them. He looked at them for a long time. He asked Derek what the specified W/C ratio was for the deck overlay mix. Derek looked at his notes and gave an answer. Farley asked the same question of me. I said I would like to clarify something before we continued. The room went very still. Gerald looked at me. Derek looked at me. 11 other people looked at me. I reached into my jacket pocket and I placed a USB drive on the table. I said that drive contained the complete as-built materials record for the Millbrook Creek project, including all purchase orders, delivery confirmations, and substitution memos, and that it represented a significant deviation from the VDOT-approved specifications in at least 4 documented categories. I said I also had in my possession audio recordings of conversations in which I had been directed to present inaccurate documentation to this review, and that I had submitted copies of all materials to VDOT's Office of Inspector General at 7 o'clock that morning. I want to tell you that what followed was dramatic and cinematic. It wasn't. There was just silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it. Farley picked up the USB drive and looked at it. He looked at me. He asked if I was a licensed PE in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I said I was. License number PE041872, active. No disciplinary history. He said he needed to suspend the review pending receipt and evaluation of the materials on the drive, and that he would be recommending a formal investigation. Gerald stood up. His face was a color I had never seen on a human being before. He said this was an internal matter, and that the documentation discrepancies were the result of a clerical process that was already being corrected. Farley said he appreciated that, and that VDOT would be in touch with the company's legal representative. Derek said nothing. He had not said a word since I put the drive on the table. He was looking at his binder like it might tell him what to do. I picked up my bag and I walked out of the conference room. In the hallway, I stopped, and I stood there for a moment, and I thought about whether I had just ended my career. Then I thought about the bridge. I thought about the load ratings, and the chloride exposure, and the winter road salt, and the concrete that would start to fail in 20 years instead of 75. I thought about the truck driver who would be on that bridge on the wrong day. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The investigation took 4 months. VDOT's OIG worked in coordination with the Virginia Attorney General's office and, eventually, the Federal Highway Administration, because the project had received federal funding. They pulled every document, every email, every PO. They interviewed every member of the project team. Derek was terminated within 2 weeks of the review. He was subsequently charged with submitting false certifications to a state agency and with procurement fraud. He accepted a plea agreement and received 3 years of supervised probation, a substantial financial penalty, and a permanent bar from working on any state or federal contract. Gerald was investigated for his role in directing the falsification. The AG's office determined that his level of direct involvement met the threshold for charges under the Virginia Fraud Against Taxpayers Act. He resigned from Hargrove before charges were formally filed and negotiated a settlement that included a significant financial penalty and a 5-year exclusion from government contracting work. Hargrove Infrastructure Solutions was assessed a penalty of just over $2 million, required to fund the cost of a full independent engineering audit of the Millbrook Creek project, and placed on a 2-year probationary status with VDOT. The board of directors hired an outside CEO and retained me to oversee the remediation work, the actual replacement of the non-compliant materials at the company's expense, not the taxpayers. The bridge opened the following spring. I drove across it on the day it opened, early in the morning before traffic, in my truck. I stopped in the middle and I got out and I stood on the deck and looked down at the creek below, and I thought about what the numbers in my calculations actually meant, not as abstractions, as real load paths through real materials connecting real structure to real ground. I am still with the company. The new CEO is someone I respect. We have rebuilt the compliance culture from the ground up. We have an independent ethics hotline, a PE review requirement for all materials substitutions above a threshold, and a clear policy that no family relationship confers authority over technical decisions. Derek's daughter Gerald's granddaughter was born 3 months after the bridge opened. I thought about her too, driving across that bridge. I thought about the version of that bridge where I had stayed quiet, where I had stood up in that review and confirmed the specifications, where I had protected my job and my COO's family, and my 22-year relationship with the company. I thought about her driving across that bridge in 20 years. There is no version of my professional engineer license that allows me to make the choice Gerald asked me to make. When you earn that license, you sign a pledge that puts public safety above everything else, above profit, above office politics, above loyalty to your employer, above your own career. That pledge is not ceremonial. It is a legal and ethical commitment that the public relies on every time they drive across a bridge or walk into a building or drink water from a municipal system. I have been asked, since this became public, whether I was afraid when I put that drive on the table. Yes, I was genuinely afraid. I was afraid of losing my job, my income, my professional relationships, my standing in an industry I had spent my entire adult life in. I was afraid that Gerald would find a way to make me the problem, that the narrative would become about a disgruntled engineer who went rogue rather than a COO who committed procurement fraud. I was afraid that none of it would matter, that the investigation would go nowhere, that Derek would keep his job and I would lose mine, and the bridge would stand there for 20 years with substandard bearings and the wrong concrete mix, and nothing would happen until something did. But I want to tell you something about fear. Fear is not a reason. Fear is a feeling. Reasons are separate. And when I separated the fear from the reasons were all on one side. I still drive to work the same way I always have. I take Route 9 south, cross the county line, pass the old grain elevator, and turn onto Commerce Drive. Most mornings I stop at the same diner I have stopped at for 15 years, and I get the same coffee, and I sit at the counter for 20 minutes before the day starts. The waitress there, a woman who has been working that counter since before I started coming in, asked me once, after all of this had been in the local paper for a week, whether I would do it the same way again. I told her yes. She poured my coffee and said that was either the bravest thing she had ever heard or the most stubborn. I told her in my experience, those two things are usually the same. I am still here, still reviewing load calculations, still arguing with contractors about rebar spacing, still sitting through procurement meetings, and reminding people that cheaper is not the same as equivalent, still making sure that the things we build will be there when they need to be, holding the weight that is placed on them, doing exactly what they promised to do. That's the job. That's always been the job. If you're watching this and you work in any field where your professional judgment stands between a decision and its consequences, engineering, medicine, aviation, construction, finance, I want you to hear this clearly. The moment someone in authority asks you to set aside your professional obligation for the sake of convenience or cost savings or family dynamics, that is not a gray area. That is the moment your entire training and your entire professional identity is being tested. And what you do in that moment is the whole thing. It is the whole point of everything you learned. Document everything. Keep your records. Know your obligations. And when the moment comes, and if you stay in this long enough, the moment will come. Do not mistake fear for a reason. The bridge is still standing. I checked on it last Tuesday.
Some days feel off. Like I'm standing but still falling. A little pain, a little tired, and no one to tell it all to. There are days that feel unsteady, like I'm drifting out of place. Every step just feels so heavy, with a smile I have to fake. A little hurt I keep inside me, a little weight I always hide, and 1,000 quiet worries I've been holding deep inside. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. I keep walking through the silence like it's all I've ever known. Every crowded room reminds me how it feels to be alone. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Maybe one day I'll be stronger, maybe I'll learn how to speak, but for now I keep it buried in the parts of me too weak. There's no one here to tell it to, no one who would understand. So I carry all these feelings like they're slipping through my hands. A little broken, little lost, trying hard to just get through. All these nights I stay awake with everything I never say to you. Don't pity me. My heart doesn't need your mercy. I can still stand on my own. I was broken by your leaving, fell deeper than I thought I would. But pain has taught me how to heal now and survive what once I couldn't. You don't have to look back sadly, don't reach out with guilty hands. What you shattered made me stronger. Now I rise where I once collapsed. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow, I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling, I'll learn to breathe again. I once begged for your affection, now I've learned my worth in scars. And the man you left in pieces found his own way through the dark. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow, I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling, I'll learn to breathe again. Begun. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow, I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling, I'll rise alone again. I'll rise alone again.